afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I think when I was in the Cape Town, when we had the session in Cape Town, I went to the stage and I laughed with the MC, and I just wanted to be sure that I don't repeat my same mistakes. But good afternoon, and I think welcome to the session. I think I'll be giving you an honest overview. I think it's my personal experience. And while I do know that inside we do have a lot of actuaries, now is not the time for you to be, starting with the figures. This is my journey. Please also create your own journey as we go along. So I'll be addressing, just as the MC indicated, regulatory difficulties, and I think it's a very important topic for us to understand. But before I get into it, I just want to let you know that I've celebrated my sweet 16 at the Council for Medical Schemes. So I graduated to move on towards my 21st. And I think it has been an amazing journey. And you can't be an expert without an industry that makes you an expert. We're all professionals in our roles, but whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in technology, the industry kind of shapes you. So I think I had the privilege of dealing with medical schemes, administrators, and managed care organizations, and obviously looking into their operations kind of shaped me, as well as the oversight and guidance by the Council for Medical Schemes. Now, I submitted my resignation in November, and then in December was my notice period, right? So then we had a family bereavement, and it wasn't a good time for me to actually deal with a handover and leaving the CMS. So between having to deal with your family and having to deal with your grief, there were also reports that needed to be reviewed. There were also deadlines that, that the CMS needed to take into account. And I was mindful of, it was December, people were closing. So I had to deal with a lot in December, right? So kind of navigated my way around that. And then came Jan and Feb. And I went from being, in the regulatory space to being unemployed as a student and living my absolutely best life for the first week. I thoroughly enjoyed my experience because it was just a week of having to do nothing, not having to think about work, not having to think about responsibilities, and just kind of took time off to be with my family, to support them, during the grieving process, and then also to kind of, package what am I going to do next? What is the next journey for me? So the main reason, and I think that's the question that I always get, why did you leave CMS after 16 years? And it's nothing personal, but it was my personal journey. I needed to move on to my next chapter. And also, it was important for me to get my qualifications. So I was brave enough to start a master's program. And the topic was cybercrime and AI in healthcare, right? Very brave. I nearly ended up in a mental institution because I've read enough and I'm done with reading. I'll probably start again in August. But I think I've just read so many articles and it was a difficult thing. But it was also my personal journey. I needed to get that done, and that was just my own journey. And I'm sure we all have our own journeys and experiences. But then now, just when I was done submitting my studies and I was thinking I'm going to enjoy, the season of unemployment, then Insight was brave enough to say, listen, there's an opportunity. Can you kind of, can you step in and help from a governance perspective? And I also had to do reflection. I've been with the regulator and I know things a certain way, but I also needed to do my own reflection and, from a fairness perspective, were we fair? Could we have done better? And I think this is how we get into the topic now. So I think I need to note that I'm still under probation, and I hope nothing that I say here would be used against me. It shouldn't be used against me, but I think I just wanted to give that overview. So let me get back to the slides. And then obviously address the healthcare value chain. So I think from your perspective, you kind of have your medical scheme members, that's the center, right? And then I've got different parties and they all play a role. So this is just 4, because I'm giving my experience from a medical scheme perspective, but I do also know that we have other people in the audience that might be from a pharmaceutical perspective or from hospitals. So you guys also fit in there, but I think for the purposes of this is just the ones that I've been exposed to. So you have your board of trustees, so you have your medical scheme members, And they pay their monthly contributions religiously. Sometimes they don't actually fully understand what they sign up for, but they also need protection. Then you have your board of trustees and your principal officers, as well as scheme management, and they kind of steer the ship. They set governance guidelines. They kind of ensure that members have access to healthcare, and they also play a very important role. I mean, without a board and PO, there wouldn't also be schemes, but also without members, there would not be medical schemes. So I think we need to look at the importance of that. Then you also have the Council for Medical Schemes, which is obviously the regulatory body, and they also have an interest in terms of protecting members, and part of their roles will also be to look at medical scheme member complaints, etc., and as well as to provide the industry with guidance in terms of reports, etc. Then you have your accredited entities, and I mean, they really do play an important part, because some schemes, I mean, if you're a small medical scheme, it wouldn't make sense for you to start your own self-administration model. I think it will be too costly. So you have your administrators and managed care organizations. They also play a very important role in terms of this. Then you have your non-accredited entities, and Insight would fall under that, because we offer specialized services that the board or principal officers might need. So, I mean, if you look at it from the next slide, it is kind of a band, and once you have a band, everyone needs to move together. There must be an element of harmony. So all the parties must work together so that there's not chaos in the industry. And I think you can't find a band where they don't trust each other. It wouldn't make sense. They would want to outplay each other. But once you work in harmony, I think it should actually work much better. Then, just from a regulatory red tape perspective, you might want to ask, what is it? It is basically anything that is complex, burdensome, and where the compliance requirements that are imposed, doesn't actually promote it doesn't promote innovation, and it kind of stifles innovation. So you want an industry where you need regulation, which is important, however, but it must also be empowering at the same time. While you're protecting members, you must also then create opportunities for either competition or for innovation as well. So anything that makes regulation difficult, or for schemes to kind of do the business of a medical scheme, I think that is a contributing factor to your regulatory red tape. So if you look at the what would aggravate regulatory red tape, it might be aspects like outdated legislation. I think that is quite important. And I mean, you want to make an example of the Medical Schemes Act, I think enacted in 1998, and it has not been amended since. But at the same time, medical schemes deal with modern crises, so they have technology that they're dealing with, and any other type of challenges that's kind of modern and was not anticipated when the legislation was enacted. The other aspect also, if you look at it from that perspective, is also your regulatory resource constraints. So just from a CMS perspective, and I think other regulators might also have similar challenges, but I think Barry indicated that Insight has 105 employees, so I think keep that number in mind. But the 2023 and 2024 CMS industry report indicated that there's 71 medical schemes, 42 managed care organizations, 7,718 brokers, and 2,193 brokerages. But the CMS only have 125 employees. So you're looking at an organization that must kind of regulate the whole industry, and they're sitting with 125. So this was in 2024. So minus myself, it's on 124 as we speak now. It's not really, but I'm just being factual, and I'm sure the actuaries would be able to confirm that. So when you look at the responsibilities of a regulator, and you can also identify that the resource constraints, it's a key challenge. You kind of feel sympathetic for them as well, taking into account that Insight, which is a private organization, we're sitting on 105 people. So I think if you kind of look those figures into account, yeah, it says something else. Then if you look at your procedural delays, so I think sometimes from a regulatory perspective, I think sometimes when certain things happen, schemes want immediate responses. They want their matters to be heard, and sometimes that is a challenge I think you're looking at appeals, inquiries, inspections, etc., that might have taken longer than needed, that also kind of frustrated the industry. And I think that is something that we have to take into account. We can't now sugarcoat things and act like things were okay, but actually they were not. Then another contributing factor is also limited enablement function, right? So the CMS works under, so the legislation is the Medical Schemes Act, but they can't execute all their operations under the Medical Schemes Act. So they would also need additional legislation. For example, they have the Levies Act that they work on to assist them with collecting levies. And at the same time, you also have, for example, your Financial Sector Regulations Act and your Protection of Funds Act. So these are additional legislation to assist the CMS in terms of executing their mandate, given all the challenges that they have from a legislative perspective. Now, there's an interesting thing that says it takes two to tango. And I want to kind of, use this platform not to see it as we bashing the regulator. That is not the purpose. We're also not bashing medical schemes, but I think it is quite important that we also get an overview of the strengths is in the medical scheme space, as well as, strengths in from a regulated perspective. And I want to just kind of touch on that, and that is just my view. So if you look at the strengths from a CMS perspective, right? So there's a legislative mandate that they're executing, so they are allowed to carry on certain things in terms of the Medical Schemes Act. And they've also taken critical intervention where necessary. And those ones are specifically in cases where members were at risk and the scheme. And I think sometimes you forget that the scheme is a legal entity on its own. You need to treat it like a person. So where the scheme and members are at risk, CMS needed to take intervention, and mostly emanating from poor governance or solvency and financial sustainability. And I think more so when when whatever type of action gets taken by an organization and it results in members not having access to healthcare, I think the CMS really, they have stepped up in terms of those circumstances. Then a very important part as well is that there is new leadership at CMS, and I think we've seen the willingness by the registrar to actually engage with the industry, and that is also a step in the right direction. And then just from a different perspective, the CMS sits with institutional knowledge, right? So they look at the bulk of the medical schemes, and they have all the data. So they fully understand the healthcare dynamics of the medical scheme industry. Whereas, if you may be an administrator, you would have your limited view because of your type of members that you deal with. But the CMS kind of sits holistically. And as I said, they do have institutional memories in terms of that. Then a key thing, they also do sit with skilled staff, right? So I think in the previous unit that I was in, there was an 85% staff turnover rate within a period of 2 to 3 years. And all of the people that left were actually absorbed by the industry. And I think really Insight would not have taken that risk with me if they really did not value the skill set. And it's a different type of skill set that gets built from a regulatory perspective. Then I think we also need to deal with the areas of improvement, right? And the key thing is the tone of engagement. And I want to make my example first of what I'm currently experiencing at Insight. And I think, just look at it from my perspective. So my boss is Dr. Tebogo Paleng. So when I started at Insight, I think in the first week, when we had our staff meeting, he told me that I can't call him doctor anymore. I need to find a new name. And in the meeting, he threatened that he will report me to you, Busi. And then I cockily said, well, it's not a dismissible offense because I'm respecting you as an elder. So now there's a new name, so TP. So you'll hear the name TP quite often. And I think you also maybe need to indicate if I need to go for counseling after this session. So when I got to Insight, I did my induction, and then I got assigned to a very interesting project, right? So I'm happy with the project. And then our actuary team, they have this nice Power BI tool, right? So I'm getting data, I'm comparing, I'm like, oh, this is nice. It's a new project. Okay, do the business model. What is your value proposition? And I'm like, oh, this is a nice project. So I'm nearly done with the report. And now I send my report to TP for review. So he responds back. So I'm thinking he's going to now, show out errors or whatever. There's no errors. So he responds like, so why are you writing this report like it's a CMS report? You know? And I'm like, and my favorite question to him, what do you mean? So I go back and I check, and he's like, no, check the font. So I check the font, it's 12. He's like, it looks like a CMS report. And my response was, but TP, it seems normal to me because I have big eyes, but I'm blind. So it seems okay, but nevertheless, let me change it back to what you want. So that's already the font size. Then after that, there's now an email. So I'm sending an email and I'm thinking I'm being courteous. So I'm like, no, kind regards. I'm explaining, this is it, this is what we do next. And then I get another message, Pussy, we need to monitor my WhatsApp conversations, man. Then there's an email. He sends a message and he's like, why are you writing this email like you're a police officer working for SAPS? I felt what? So now, now I'm laughing, but I'm like, okay, for that one, I had no comeback. I don't want to lie. Let me not make up something. But then I think the last one is it's a new client now, and then I'm putting. So I did like board induction. I did a board induction for the scheme, and in the board induction, I now need to put my tables in. So it's like a turquoise, but it's a sea green, whatever type of a color. So I'm matching my tables with the logo of the scheme, which makes sense because that's the principle of insight. You can see all the colors and stuff. So now the same person, I don't want to mention his name anymore, responds and he's like, so why do you use so many colors in your table? My response to him, but TP, I'm colored. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do with the table? So I think, because he's got experience, and I wrote the way I wrote, and it was my tone, and I didn't think how it would land across at the next person. So the same actually kind of happens when you look at it from a CMS type of a perspective, right? So when the regulator responds to you, sometimes it's really not personal. Sometimes it is just, this is an issue, this is where we found the information. This is what we want you to do. You have X amount of days to get the information. Failure to give the information will result in X, Y, Z. So it's a love story, but without the love. But it gives you a sequence of how you need to kind of look at it. And I think so, sometimes you take offense because you feel that it's a tone, but it's not a tone, it's just they're explaining it from their perspective. Right, so I think there is maybe something that can also need to be looked at. And then in some cases, the CMS would actually kind of give you a compliment. So they would say, maybe if a report is done, it's a detailed report, or you have detailed minutes. Your minutes are well kept. So they're not going to say, wow, guys, this is like the best policy in the world. They will never say that. It will not be a policy that will move heaven and earth. They will say the policy is detailed, your registers are well maintained, the contract is X, Y, Z. So they do give compliments. However, they actually would focus on the non-compliant aspects. So there they need to give you more information. So sometimes the reporting might seem just, might not seem appropriate in terms of how it's laid out, because you'll see a short sentence, okay, this was okay. But sometimes they need to explain the non-compliance so that you can also understand the non-compliance. And I think in terms of the tone of engagement, I think that can kind of also um, you know, set off disagreements. Then I think a key thing also now is in terms of your delay in terms of policy reforms. And I think, as I've indicated, you're moving in terms of technology, you're moving in terms of certain things. But for example, you have your medical schemes act that's outdated. I think also the industry also wants an update in terms of PMB reviews. As you know, there's other examples of where delay in policy reforms can also kind of set medical schemes back. And I think that's something that the CMS can actually kind of improve on. And then heavy intervention. So I want to kind of, package this a certain way. Where critical interventions are necessary, I think the CMS is well within its right to take those interventions, specifically if it comes to, poor governance, or when it comes to financial soundness. However, if you really have to honestly look back, there might have been a few cases, I think, where a different approach might have been better. And I think that is something that you need to kind of take into account. And then just on the last one, slow response times to entities can also kind of, doesn't help with the Tango session. So on the next one, I'm going to be dealing with medical schemes, and some of the medical schemes here present. It's nothing personal. I think I'm just giving it from my perspective. So I think from a medical scheme perspective, the positive of medical scheme members or medical schemes know their members, right? When you engage with principal officers, they would tell you, and I would ask, is this relevant in your scheme? They would say, no, this is our membership age, this is our membership demographic. Our members might not be affected by X because of X, Y, Z, or it might be a geographic thing. So, schemes really fully understand their members. And then just the key thing is that the majority of schemes have good governance in place. I think that is something that we need to take into account. And you also appreciate it a little bit more because some board members are not even compensated. So imagine putting your career on the line because it's a big risk that you take to be on the board. You sacrifice your time and your effort without any compensation. And I think that also says a lot about the medical scheme industry. Then what I could also pick up now is that there's a growing appetite for governance, training, and risk understanding. So you can see that schemes do attend the CMS inductions, specifically for POs and for trustees. You can also see they attended at other institutions. And I think now that I'm at Insight, I'm also getting those type of questions as to what, can Insight actually, for example, provide training? And you can see the way schemes are kind of moving because I got a weird request, not really weird. I think I'm so used to doing board induction for trustees. So when a scheme says, can you please do audit committee induction? And sometimes we don't even think about audit committee members, but they actually deal with key issues from a scheme perspective. So you can see, the thinking cap is kind of okay for schemes, and I think they're really moving in the right direction. And then also what I can pick up is that a lot of schemes are moving towards integrated reporting and King 4 alignment. So it's not a requirement for you to do integrated reporting, but I think some schemes have just adopted it out of good culture, that you can kind of see them moving towards that. Then just from a negative perspective, and yeah, I think take it as is, not all schemes have good governance in place. The majority would have, but you do have a few schemes that, where board members really don't understand their roles and responsibilities. And it's not to say that that is necessarily a negative thing. I think you can always train in advance. But sometimes you find that some board members would kind of make it difficult for the PO to operate. Either they want to take over the roles and responsibilities from the PO from an operational perspective, or they might not always provide strategic guidance to the principal officers. Then in certain cases, for some restricted medical schemes, sometimes the board of trustees, they would kind of think that their role is only to forward member complaints and escalate that. So you do pick that up in certain schemes, not all schemes though. Then just from a reactive perspective, and once again, not all schemes, some schemes do have a very reactive approach, right? So they would, for example, wait up until there's a CMS inspection or up until there's a CMS inquiry to also kind of work on their own governance. And once again, not all schemes. Then the governance weaknesses. Sometimes you do pick up governance weaknesses in medical schemes. And I think the last one is sometimes where you can find over-reliance on service providers. Now, I'm not saying schemes should not utilize service providers, but I think over-reliance when it results now in undue influence, when the board no longer makes its own decision, and then you have service providers that kind of have undue influences. So I think in concluding the positive and the negatives, I think, both the regulator and the CMS have a role to play. So they both face positives. They do have areas of challenges or that they need to work on. So I think they kind of need to take it from that perspective. I'm going to try and skip to the last one because I think I want us to look at what's going to be the way forward, right? So from a disconnect, right? I think I've dealt with the outdated legislation. I've dealt with the technology advancements. I think also sometimes the reactive engagement. I do think there might be a need for more engagement. And then also the limited space for innovation. And I think this is a key thing because you have business of a medical scheme on the one side, but you have regulatory restrictions. And at the same time, there must be innovation. So I think, these are the core things, as well as an element of the technical complexity, sometimes of communication from the regulator. I think it can be simplified as well to kind of make it a little bit easier for medical schemes. Then just, I think, from a medical scheme perspective, I think medical schemes, if you want to kind of remove the disconnect, there can also be structured engagement or communication channels with how and when you need to kind of communicate with the regulator. Then you do find that some schemes are kind of, reluctant to share innovation with regulators, and I think it might also be for other healthcare organizations. So I think this is actually where you need to kind of promote communication in terms of, making sure that both parties are aligned in terms of innovation. Then uncertainty about CMS expectations. I think this is a critical one. We recently had a meeting, or we recently had a scheme that faced a new challenge, right? So it's a completely new challenge. The scheme didn't anticipate for something to happen. It's not really their fault. So we had to kind of sit and kind of look at what are the challenges for the scheme. And then you would find the same person again, I think the initial STP now, indicated to me, Avril, let's see how we can help the scheme, right? It is a critical issue. But for this exercise, please just put back on your regulatory hat. So I had to kind of put back my regulatory hat and to see what are the challenges that the scheme are facing. And so many times you find that as a PO of a scheme or as a board, you kind of sit with your problem and your challenges in isolation, right? And you don't know how to navigate it. It's not that schemes want to be compliant, non-compliant, but I think sometimes also they're not sure how to go about and how to engage around becoming compliant. Then I think just from a communication perspective, I do think, also try and communicate and as far as possible give examples, give evidence of what the regulator would request. They can also kind of ease the regulatory red tape. Now, the proactive governance, move to self-governance, try and see where you can, improve your own governance. Also make sure that you have accurate and timely regulatory responses. Then also the key one, let's look at innovation. Innovation is not something that should be taken away. And then demonstrate governance, don't just document it. For example, enhance governance discipline. We recently met with a scheme, and the scheme, once we asked for certain documentation because we're doing like a governance audit, the scheme just indicated it's a board decision. We have zero tolerance for X, Y, Z, and that already says, that there's really governance discipline. And then also early engagement with the regulators. So I think this is important for me, and I want to stress out that even if you find yourself in a difficult position and you don't know how to communicate, I think communication is key. And the first reason is once you communicate, you put forward, you just became aware of this, and this is what you need to get done, so you inform the regulator. Also, should there be an appeals process or should there be any court action afterwards, if you look at it from a court of law perspective, they will take into account that you've notified the regulator as soon as you became aware of the challenges. So I think that is quite important from an engagement perspective. Then I think I want to look at the window of opportunity. So there is a new registrar that was appointed in December, right? December 2024. And I want to leave you with a few words that, and it's not my words, let me not take credit, but if you look at studies, there is a view that the tone or the culture of an organization will change once a CEO is appointed. And I think similarly, the registrar holds the position of CEO. And that takes about for a period of 1 to 2 years before you can actually see a culture change in any type of organization. And I do think it provides an opportunity for the industry to engage and to kind of mend relationships. So you might ask, how can this be done, or how can the relationship be improved? I would say communication, and I think, so as I've indicated, there would be annual forums, but I think quarterly engagements might also be the way forward. So where you kind of have to look at, having level-headed discussions around what is pressing the medical scheme industry now, what is critical for us. I think quarterly engagements might be a good thing. And I think also sometimes alignment of strategic objectives, because ultimately both medical schemes and CMS have one objective. You might as well come together and kind of align your strategies. And I think maybe in terms of having compliance monitoring tools that can assist the medical scheme industry. So, yeah, I think that is it. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.